Good morning, and welcome to Laguna Art Museum. I really wanted to say thanks at the beginning to those who helped develop this program, because the truth is that when you put the slide at the end, nobody pays any attention to it. These people were a really big help in providing context and digging up historical images and so forth. But Tom Lamb played the biggest role. With me at his side, he literally built this PowerPoint. In 2016, Laguna Beach became the first entire city in the United States to be designated a National Historic Landscape by the National Park Service. The documentation for which is lodged in the Library of Congress. And the occasion was memorialized in this book. Look at whose painting is on the cover. None other than Joseph Kleitsch's Laguna coastline, painted in approximately 1923 from the vantage point of Pine Castle on High Drive. Let's go back in time and figure out why Laguna came to look the way it does. First, let's go way back to 1769, Portola expedition, the first overland exploration of California led by Gaspar de Portola at the behest of a guy who was not only the king of Spain, but also the king of Naples and Sicily, Charles III. Not to be confused with the other Charles III. As the Portola expedition left San Diego, the cavalcade trotted up coast and decamped on the San Luis River in today's Oceanside, where Mission San Luis Rey was later established. Now, Mission San Luis Rey, among the missions, some of them have honorary titles. For example, Mission Santa Barbara is called Queen of the Missions. Well, San Luis Rey is given the appellation King of the Missions. And the reason why is because it became the headquarters for the Mexican government during its reign over Alta California. And much to my surprise, after that, from 1847 to 1857, this building was the operational base for the United States military. As the cavalcade proceeded further up coast, they saw our steep sheep hills right in this area. Just imagine how rich the sea life was along our coast in those undiscovered days by the Spaniards. Their eyes glanced off to the right, looking up the very inviting, verdant Capistrano River Valley. And so the expedition turned in that direction, away from the coast, heading up San Juan Creek. And then they went left up the Cañada Gobernadora tributary through today's Coto de Caza and across the Plano Trabuco and the Trabuco Creek, where, by the way, one of the soldiers left his rifle by mistake, which was called a Trabuco, which is the derivation of the name Trabuco Canyon. And then they proceeded across Santiago Creek and the Santa Ana River, and they wound up in San Gabriel, where another mission was ultimately established. Going back to San Juan Capistrano, their sojourn there eventually gave birth to our local mission, which is a whole nother story, except to say that Joseph Kleitsch painted it several times. And I love the way he tucked himself behind these arches and created this view diagonally across the courtyard, peering through a more distant set of arches with processing black-robed nuns to boot. But this business of when the expedition made its turn inland is the first seminal reason why Laguna turned out to look the way it does. Not having traversed the Laguna coastline, a significant amount of our area was left out of and not included in the King's adjacent Spanish land grants that were later subdivided into Mexican land grants. You can see Rancho Niguel here, and Rancho San Joaquin here. But then we have this no man's land in here, which a little over 100 years later, thanks to the signature of President Abraham Lincoln, later became available for what? Excellent. Before we get into the homesteading, I wanted to just point out and have you take a look at this wonderful, rare, historic 1885 topographic map that includes the Laguna coastline area. The Orange County surveyor, John Canis, gave me a copy as a retirement present in 2005. Our offices shared a common wall at the county headquarters, and we were good friends. On close examination, when you get up close to the map, you can actually see many of the early homestead structures. Now, homesteading is the second seminal reason why Laguna looks the way it does. Because in 1875, between 1875 and 1911, these 38 homestead claims ranged in size from 9 to 161 acres. And as homesteader claims began to mount, our early settlers began inviting family and friends down to Laguna to see what they got. And it was really neat because among them are some artists who immediately realized that Laguna's scenic beauty presented an abundance of painting opportunities. Around 1896, two artists in particular are often credited for spawning the Laguna Plein Air Arts Colony movement. They were, on the left, Pasadena architectural illustrator and part-time local resident Norman St. Clair, and on the right, William Lees Judson, who was the founding dean of the USC School of Fine Arts and Architecture. Both of them seized on the opportunity to bring their students on field trips down to Laguna to paint outdoors, beginning around 1896. Now, St. Clair's legacy lives on through the work of his son, Aubrey, who was a very highly respected architect who designed many of the finest buildings in town, including the Water District and the fire station across the street, and yes, even the Betty Davis Mansion at the foot of Diamond. Now, on the other hand, Judson's legacy lives on as well. Not wanting to risk any of his three sons becoming just another starving artist, he taught them how to design and build stained glass windows at the Judson Studios, situated in the Arroyo Seco in Highland Park. And Judson Studios is still run by his great-great-grandson, my close personal friend, David Judson. The stained glass windows at South Coast Plaza, LA Central Library, the Air Force Academy Chapel, and even the U.S. Capitol Prayer Room rank among their thousands of commissions spanning 125 years. I attended their 125th anniversary event this past May 21st. Now, soon thereafter, by word of mouth, artists throughout the region and country sought out the topographically rich Laguna landscape in search of beautiful scenic compositions for their paintings. A number of these travelers readily decided Laguna was the place and established their early home studios here. Among many others, way too many to mention, were Frank Kuprian, Anna Hills, William Griffith, Joseph Kleitsch, and William Wendt. And other prominent artists, including Edgar Payne, established part-time home studios in Laguna while living full-time in Los Angeles and elsewhere. But they all came after the arrival of St. Clair and Judson. Eventually, these homesteads, many of them with their own unique topography, morphed into distinctively different neighborhoods. Let's take a little look at the South Laguna homesteads. Napoleon Wilson had Three Arch Bay. Leon Goff had everything from Thousand Steps up to Camel Point. Another Goff had where the Montage is in Blue Lagoon. But the oldest of the homesteads, of course, is the Thurston homestead, which straddles the gullet of Aliso Canyon and included Aliso Beach. But, you know, just looking at this one, visualize now, you got each of these different distinctive neighborhoods. Looking from here in South Laguna, going into Victoria Beach, it looks different. Through Woods Cove, it looks different. You go up Bluebird Canyon, it looks different. You go down into the Oak Street area, it looks different. You go over to the El Bosque area, it's different. And you go into downtown and it's different. And you go out the canyon and it's different. So let's have a look at 3 historic tract maps to get some perspective on this matter. Here is the proposed 1906 Costa Royale tract map in South Laguna, depicting today's West Street, Catalina, Eagle Rock, and 2nd Avenue, except that in those days, they were called really neat names. It's unfortunate they were changed. Neptune Court, Cliff Court, Eagle Rock Court, and Cavern Court. And notice these neat little landscaped islands that were going to be constructed right at the base of the streets. Darn it, it never happened. And then over here on the right, it's hard to see, but these are labeled deep ravine, deep ravine, deep ravine, deep ravine. And that is where, in the early 1950s, Myford Irvine bought the land and paid for the mass grading to build our local hospital, even though the land was not within the Irvine Ranch. And this is a wonderful photo of Myford Irvine posing with his second wife, Gloria, and their son, James Myford Irvine, who's a close personal friend. Then we have, moving north, the El Mirador tract on a Joseph Yoch homestead between Legion and St. Anne Streets. The layout was designed by his daughter, Florence. Notice the town's only roundabout on Catalina, which is right here, and the distinctively named streets like El Bosque and El Camino del Mar, curving through the undulating terrain. An example of one of the historic homes in that particular neighborhood is Isaac Frazee's second home studio, which was built fairly late, 1940. But even in 1940, that window was reputed to be the largest piece of glass in the entire town. So, you know, there have been so many widely recognized people associated with Laguna. You know, Betty Davis, Bette Midler, Frank Miller of the Mission Inn fame, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson and their kids, David and Ricky, Hopalong Cassidy's William Boyd, and today's Dick Metz, and Greg and Barbara McGillivray. Internationally acclaimed pioneers in the IMAX film industry. I just thought it was really cool. Tom Lamb came up with that photo of them when they were kids. Before moving on to our third track, let's pause for a moment and visit one of Laguna's sometimes overlooked native daughters, Florence Yoch. Born July 15th, 1890, she was the last of 6 daughters of Joseph and Catherine Yoch. They founded the Hotel Laguna. And I love this Kleich painting of the old hotel. We can still just walk right by this side of the current hotel and take note of the eucalyptus trees out along the Old Coast Road. They actually found or commandeered the old abandoned schoolhouse in the abandoned Mormon colony out at El Toro Road and Laguna Canyon Road and moved it into town to establish the first church, St. Joseph's Church, named after Joseph Yoch's patron saint, that you can see in several of Kleich's paintings, but in this particular case, it's Foothill Village of 1925. And after the Yochs donated the land and helped to build St. Catherine's Church on Temple Terrace, Joseph and Edna Kleich acquired the church and turned it into their home and studio. This is a wonderful, approximately 1951 photograph of Edna Kleich. Obviously looks like she's painting a portrait. Long after her husband's death, still running an art school in that building. It is where the little church by the sea is today. Now, after studying at Berkeley and Cornell and the University of Illinois, Florence became one of the first women landscape architects in America. She was renowned for her sumptuous landscape designs for Hollywood movie moguls, including Jack L. Warner and Louis B. Mayer and a lot of those kinds of people. And she even completed the master plan for Irvine Park in 1920. And we can tell how highly respected she was, because I think it's the first time that the Orange County Board of Supervisors ever gave such an important commission to a woman. Here we have Rolino, one of the magnificent estates that she designed in Montecito. This might shock you, but Florence designed movie sets, including Gone with the Wind. She also did The Grapes of Wrath and other, there were a total of 9 motion pictures. Yup, Florence gave us the El Mirador tract. She and her professional and life partner, Lucille Council, lived quietly in San Marino, practicing landscape architecture. Late in life, they bought a wonderful home in Carmel, where Florence died in 1972. Okay, back on track with tracts. Here is the 1906 Laguna Cliffs subdivision, developed by Elsie McKnight and Howard Heisler on Irvine Ranch land acquired from James Irvine II, meaning that this tract was built on a former Spanish-Mexican land grant outside of the Homestead area. And recall that the easterly boundary of the Irvine Rancho San Joaquin ran down the center line of Laguna Creek, which is today's Broadway. In comparison with the previous 2 homestead tracts we saw, notice how the heart of the tract features a more orderly system of parallel and perpendicular streets, much like Corona del Mar, which was also developed on the Irvine Ranch. Here is where Laguna Art Museum, or the original art gallery, was located. And it's interesting because there's a little street right here that's hard for you to see, but it's labeled Spring Street. It's a paper street that was never built. And that name most likely comes from the artesian spring that welled to the surface where the art museum is located. Actually, this was one of the hot spots in town in the early days for locals to come and get water, was right underneath this building, or on the, actually welling to the surface. And that might even be why Heisler sold the land to the Artists Association at half price, presumably gaining a deduction for gifting the other half, and also why the museum basement seemed damp at times. Here are a couple of the many distinctive houses in the Laguna Cliffs tract. Artist Henri de Cryf's home studio at the foot of Hawthorne Street. And just a few doors up, a St. Clair family residence from one of the founders of the plein air arts movement. Now, another interesting story about that subdivision is that after Heisler started selling lots, in this case to the Jarras family, who built a large home directly across the street from what is today the lawn bowling area, Heisler changed his mind and decided to subdivide our beloved North Laguna Oceanfront Park for residential purposes. And since the park was a sales feature for the benefit of the hundreds of lots all the way upslope against the Irvine Ranch, Joseph Jarras I sued Heisler and won in court. Heisler Park stayed in place, but the joke among friends is that the park should have been renamed Jarras Park, not Heisler Park. But the name Heisler stuck, And in appreciation for Jarris's efforts, the park across Coast Boulevard from the museum fronting on Lower Cliff Drive was named for Jarris. So we've had a look at 3 tract maps that help us understand why there's such diversity between our neighborhoods, just like there's tremendous architectural diversity within them. But the main thing I want you to know is that it is the Portola Expedition turnaway from the coast up the Capistrano Valley, homestead colonization, and the diverse topographic fabric moving from south to north. These are the driving factors of why Laguna looks so different than other towns. When you look at how the human development and settlement is spread across such a richly diverse terrain of hillsides and hilltops, large and small canyons, plateaus, cliffs, both within canyons and certainly on the ocean front, from which spectacular promontories project seaward, with beautiful coves tucked in between them, I believe it can be said that Laguna is, in its exact and precise form, unlike any other town in California. Yes, there are similar places, but none of them come close to replicating exactly what we have. And that's precisely why the activities of the early settlers, their early guests, the early artists, and the early tourists who came to buy their early paintings unfolded the way it did. And now we have this magnificent Kleich exhibition hanging on the walls around us. Of all our great artists, Kleich was among the first to become concerned about the rapid transformation of Laguna from hamlet to village in the early 1920s. It seems like he furiously ran around town painting from various vantage points to record that transformation through the lens of his extraordinary kaleidoscope of color. The title of the Irvine Museum's incredible catalog of his work, published in 2007. The principal author, Dr. Patricia Trenton, called upon me to find the locations of Kleich's paintings in various geographic areas throughout California. Now, this map summarizes just a fraction of his work here in Laguna. His home and studio is right here, basically on Legion at Thru Street. So the high density of the number of canvases he painted in his own immediate backyard required the inset. You can see the numbers corresponding to different paintings just in the downtown area with a few others outside. So let's peek at the locations of 4 of his paintings. First of all, Laguna Coastline, which was on the dust jacket of the book, designating the city a National Historic Landscape. This one, again, painted from the vantage point approximately of Pine Castle. The Pavilions Market's right here, Riddle Field is right here. This is in Boat Canyon. That's Hawthorne Street, there's Myrtle. The museum is located in these trees. And then Laguna Cove, painted in 1925, painted from Crescent Bay Point Park, looking south. And Scintillating, reputed to be his last painting before he died, an early death, painted at the intersection of Park Avenue and Bent Street. And then we have this painting titled The Arch. Now, this is an example of how an art detective can be thrown for a loop. The title Arch Beach, which would lead to the assumption that it was painted at Arch Beach, which is a distinctive place name between the Surf and Sand Hotel and Woods Cove. And in fact, in the early days, Arch Beach was a separate town from Laguna with its own post office. And there is an arch there, but its geometry doesn't match anything close to what is in the painting. So Rick Balzer and I decided to have some fun. We traipsed the coastline looking for a better match. Does anyone want to guess where this arch is? Anyone? I heard it right. Yes, it is one of the 3 arches in Whale Island and Three Arch Bay. Although a fairly small canvas compared to Kleich's larger paintings, It's an extremely vivid and beautiful painting. There isn't time to go into other details today because there have been many more major milestones that transformed or could have transformed the look of Laguna. To highlight just a few, first was our voter approval to establish the Laguna Beach County Water District in 1925, after the wells turned brackish in Laguna Canyon. Coincidentally, the wells went brackish the day before the election, and there were 400 registered voters in it, and I think it was 399 to 1 to establish the water district. Many of you know the story about how a few town leaders dressed up in hunting garb and went up to the Huntington Beach area looking to buy property for a hunting club. And that they did. But what they were really after was water. Yes, they acquired a large site on the Santa Ana River with water rights. And after the district was established, at the same time as a $500,000 general purpose bond approved by the voters, that money was used to build what is still possibly the most beautiful building in town, the Water District building, which also housed the city operations until the City Hall was built in 1951. The council meetings took place upstairs in the old Water Board meeting room. The money was also used to pay for half the cost of laying the water line down to Laguna from Huntington Beach, with the other half being a gift paid for by James Irvine II. And the money was also used to build the city's first big concrete reservoir and pump station next to St. Catherine's Church on Temple Terrace. It's still there. That's where this historic commemorative bench is located, dedicated to Thomas Cummings, who's considered the father of the district. Sit on it sometime. It's fabulous. It's right there on Temple Terrace. I've never gotten any spots on my clothes by sitting on it. I think the Water District does a good job of maintaining it. Then in 1926, the state constructed Highway 1 along the old Coast Road, transforming it into the Coast Boulevard. This had to be the biggest rip through town in its history, tearing out all of the big trees, grading slopes, filling ravines at places like Sleepy Hollow and Bluebird Creek. And then another forgotten fact is that when the federal government foresaw the possibility of entering into World War II, the Department of Defense constructed a 4-foot thick reinforced concrete ribbon right down the middle of Highway 1, from the Canadian to the Mexican border, so that the roadbed could bear the weight of heavy military vehicles. That pad is still hidden beneath today's asphalt in Laguna. It was partially uncovered when South Coast Water District laid its new recycled water line south from Aliso Creek to 9th Avenue in 2016. As shocking a transformation as the building of the Coast Boulevard was, it pales in comparison to what would have been construction of the proposed Coast Freeway in the early 1960s. To put it mildly, that project would have totally bifurcated the town like what happened to San Clemente, destroying many of our beautiful neighborhoods all the way across town and leaving the roar and exhaust of freeway traffic to inundate the remaining neighborhoods. So this is just a little portion in the Laguna area, but here's the freeway right at Three Arch Bay. Look how close it is to the coast. That would have ripped out everything probably from Glenire up to Santa Cruz Street. And just imagine what it would have done all the way across Laguna through Emerald Bay. It would have just completely destroyed the town as we know it. It would have, to put it bluntly, blasted our coastal shelf off the face of the earth. That would have been the end of Laguna as we know it. Back to loosely chronological events. Next came the 1927 City Incorporation, which was led by artist Anna Hills, who chaired the incorporation committee. and who also co-founded this gallery with Edgar Payne. Now, jumping way forward in time, more recent transformative events included the October 27th, 1993, 16,000-acre Great Laguna Fire that destroyed 366 homes and damaged 500 more at a cost of almost $600 million, which I suspect today would be considerably higher. And then there were two voter-approved bond acts that passed by wide margins. One that opened the window to the sea on Main Beach, and the other that fortified the massive success of the Laguna Greenbelt project. And here we have my friend Carol Hoffman, who was at the time vice president of the Irvine Company, handing the deed to Laguna Canyon to Mayor Lita Lenny and Laguna Greenbelt president John Brand. Then finally, the largest public works project in the history of this city that's just finishing construction, the $100 million 2-mile-long sewer tunnel renovation inside the cliffs of South Laguna that no one can even see. Originally built in 1954, it was a 4-by-5-foot trapezoid that you had to bend over to walk in. The pipe was on the floor, and it carries 1,300,000 gallons of raw sewage a day by gravity flow with no electrical power required from Three Arch Bay to Aliso Beach before it's pumped up to the coastal treatment plant. What the Water District did was they hired the same firm, the engineering firm that did the tunnel underneath the English Channel, a world famous mining engineering firm in Colorado, and they designed the 9-foot-high Roman horseshoe arch. There is the new pipe, and its project is almost complete. So anyway, the tunnel is invisible to the public, kind of like private conversations that many have about the future of this town's beauty. It's out of sight. Now, just a little bit of an afterthought. Here's a fun historic photo of the north end of Emerald Bay with the peninsula in Emerald Bay. And here we have Irvine Cove, Abalone Cove, and Abalone Knoll. Who's in the inset? Well, actually, it's her mother, Atherley Richardson Irvine Clark, with her infant daughter, Joan Irvine Smith, in 1935. If it wasn't for Joan, the public's awareness of plein air art might not have been revived through the Irvine Museum's many publications, some of which were carefully researched by Dr. Patricia Trenton, and all of which developed under the leadership of John Stern. I'd like to share a historic video clip to conclude this program, one depicting the work of an invisible hand from the roof of the Hotel Laguna during a seminal historic moment that demonstrates the artistic juggernaut of Laguna. At the city's 90th birthday party in the city council chambers, Mayor Eisman stuck a microphone in my face and said, "Tell a story." And I was completely caught off guard. So I simply told the audience about when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to Laguna and Frank Kuprian plopped a painting in his lap. By pure coincidence, at that very instant, this historic video appeared on the screen showing that happening. There's a little bit of discrepancy because the newspaper is billed July 15th, but the video is July 14th, so something is a little bit off, but that happens with historical stuff. So here we go. There's Frank Kuprian with the painting. By the way, all of the local artists in town dressed in their smocks and their berets. You can't see it in the video, but it was described in the newspaper article. Here's the facade. This is an ocean, and we're coming across the inland facade on Coast Boulevard. And we're wrapping around the corner where the gallery is today, which is the old Bank of America. And here comes the Motorcade. See a little white thing flying around right there? That's The president waving his hat, scooping up votes for re-election. And as the car turns, you can see his balding head a little bit right there. Okay. And there's presumably the president of the Chamber of Commerce introducing Kuprian, shaking his hand with his beret and smock on, and plops a painting in his lap. There was actually there was a hoped-for luncheon for the president in Laguna that day, but there wasn't time, and they just motored on their way. I don't think these were all government vehicles following the president. They were probably enthusiasts. It's kind of interesting because the painting disappeared somewhere between then and now. In 2009, while I was working on the Edgar Payne project at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, we went down into the basement and checked the archives of the Smithsonian, and there's absolutely nothing. The only Laguna plein air painting in the National Gallery is Edgar Payne's Fifth Lake, which is up the North Fork of Big Pine Creek in the Eastern Sierra. So then I drove all the way up to Hyde Park, to the FDR Library and home. Same thing, nothing. So maybe someday someone will find out what happened to it. Sometimes the joke is that it was thrown out of the car in Camp Pendleton, but we doubt that that was the case. It had to be a nice painting. Actually, the Motorcade was from Long Beach to San Diego, and he was campaigning, but what did he do when he got to San Diego? The president boarded a big, fabulous private yacht and went on a vacation. So maybe the painting is hanging in the yacht, I don't know. Okay. Regarding the seminal Kleich show that just opened here in the museum and will be on exhibit through September, paintings are windows open to the world. That's the way it was when Kleich lived here. Spend some time in the galleries and look at what he gave us. Happy 96th birthday, Laguna.